Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of Into the Rift. As always, I'm your host, Daniel Dracos, joined tonight once again by Jacob Wolf, also known as Braille, writer for Gfinity and Esports Heaven, and then, of course, Chase Wassner, Red Shirt King, host of a number of podcasts, I think a number at this point, right?
No, definitely. All my guest-aligned stuff and interviews and everything. It all gets tossed together at some point.
And then, of course, last but not least, our writer for The Score, Chinese scene expert, Kelsey Moser.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. So Kelsey's webcam's not working tonight, so for those of you wondering, that's why her picture of Nunu and J4, for those of you who aren't LPL fans, will come into picture a little bit later in the evening. But first, we're going to start by talking about North America. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is a Zingy replacing Cloud Nguyen. And it was a bit of a rocky start. I mean, right off the bat, we saw a Zingy taking AP runes. So, aside from the horrible AP runes on Vi decision, how do we feel about a Zingy in general? Is this a good change for Dig?
No, it's not a good change for Dig. I mean, I don't know. You know, it seems like such a short answer, but anyone who's getting a 0.5 KDA, and that's 0.5, that's incredible in any kind of pro experience. And yes, the AP runes certainly hurt him, but he had his champion of choice against Team 8, a team that you would imagine if any player was going to come in and have any team that they could go up against to try to figure some things out. If it wasn't Coast, they'd say Team 8. And his Fiddlesticks just doesn't hold up at this level. And, you know, Zingy's one of those guys, people know him because he's been around in Challenger for forever, and he's done some, he's had some decent games, but he's never been on a team, he's never been able to lead a team to like a top 3 Challenger spot, let alone, be at this LCS level. And he just got smacked down in such a rough way that it really makes you wonder how much you can believe Odie's claim that Cloud Nguyen's benching had nothing to do with the interview where he didn't paint Dignitas in a positive light. That had, I'm sure, no ramifications whatsoever on Cloud Nguyen's career or this particular choice. But it's really rough to look at the play and say that that this is what makes sense for them.
Yeah, I mean, in the expansion tournament, like, Zingy was really bad. Like, sorry, but yeah, his Pantheon, he played Pantheon several times in those games, and I'm trying to remember exactly who they played against then. I think it was one of the Complexity teams. They were in the same bracket, the team he was on, which has now been transformed into TSM Darkness with a new roster or whatever, but yeah, like his Pantheon ults, I remember like distinctively that several of my friends and myself were discussing it, and it was just extremely laughable because he would just like randomly ult and his team would kind of just sit there like, what the hell are you doing? And it doesn't look like much has changed for him at all. He's still, out of everyone like in Challenger that is a free agent, there's a lot of other teams that, or a lot of other players that were extremely capable. The one that comes to mind is probably Shorter Ace, who is teamless right now. But
he's taken a step back from the game, though, right? If you follow his Twitter, he said something about taking some time to focus on studies. So he probably wasn't available.
It's his final.
But you would think, like,
semester.
Where's Kez or ThinkCard or any of the other junglers that we've seen at least have some LCS experience? Like going to a Zingy,
they're pretty locked in contracts. Those two are for now with CLGB and TDK, but. Honestly, like, yeah, like, even a Nori is an option because he recently got kicked from Roar, and he, like, yeah, like, even he wasn't considered. They just kind of took a Zingy and...
Well, wasn't he listed as a sub for Dignitas for a long time? I mean,
yes.
He
still is. Yeah.
As I found out the hard way with, I forget which tournament it was. I think it was the North American Challenger Series where there was a big controversy about Fusion having... I forget the support they had was also on another team that ended up forfeiting those games to Fusion.
Oh no, Chunky Fresh.
Yeah, Chunky Fresh. That's it. And that was a whole situation where we found out that apparently you're allowed to have, as long as it's on a bench or whatever, you're allowed to have guys on multiple teams at the same time. So yeah, he's totally been on their
Challenger.
bench. Yeah, and as
Uh,
long as not two
the
LCS teams,
ruling
but yeah.
is the ruling is as long as you you can play LCS, but you can't play Challenger directly the week after. So I think it was week 1. Team Liquid Academy was playing in that qualifier, and they weren't able to use Keith because Keith was week 1 sub for Liquid, so he was not able to play that next week. That's the only big stipulation I've ever seen Riot throw up and stand ground to. But yeah, there were many other junglers besides Ziggy. If you play LCS, you can play Challengers.
But I mean that's different. That's LCS. We're talking about playing multiple Challenger teams, not playing an LCS team and a Challenger team.
Well,
right.
But yeah, the thing is that, and why are we jumping to an interview that Cloud Nguyen did, painting Dig in a negative light, if we're already talking about the questionable decision making and there were so many other jungle choices? Why is that something that we're bringing up? We're talking about the wide selection of jungles that are possible, which I'm not even convinced that's true, because we're throwing out all these options that, oh, this is on a Challenger team and they're locked in a contract. This guy, oh, he's in this contract. Liquid Nori was just recently supposedly kicked from a team. If he was just recently supposedly kicked from a team, then these are so either there are a bunch of different options available, or
I guess my point with bringing it up is that Odie is a guy that we've at least seen some things in the past. He's a guy who can make some rash decisions sometimes, and they already had Cloud Nguyen. They'd already gone out and gotten the guy that they said was their guy. He performs better than Crumbs did over his 2-week time. They go 2-2, which is much better than Dignitas had done at any other point in the split, and then he just gets benched unceremoniously right after this interview. I feel like that matters. If we were just saying he made a bad choice in terms of the replacement for the replacement, that's one thing. But Cloud Nguyen was always there, and they didn't choose to go that way. And there isn't anything you can point to in his play that says that's why Cloud Nguyen is gone. It wasn't the winning record. It wasn't his stats. There's no explanation other than this interview that we can point to, and Odie's history of being a guy who makes decisions based off of that exact kind of action. I think that matters.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, realistically, okay. So he's benched. And
but what?
Well, okay. So
what indicates that?
No, go ahead, Kelsey. Go ahead.
I just feel like there's a huge dichotomy in what you're saying. You're saying that there were so many other options, but besides Zingy, just even besides Cloud Nguyen. So, but then you bench Cloud Nguyen because of the interview. So those two things point to a contradiction of what you're saying. So pick one or the other. I don't know.
What I'm saying is they shouldn't have benched Cloud Nguyen, but if you are going to bench him, which you should not do, you don't get a Zingy. That's why I don't see the contradiction. Well, and you shouldn't have benched him in the first place.
I think one thing to consider is we talk about contracts, and I think contracts this year are a lot stricter than they used to be. I think and obviously, I mean, I don't know what Dignitas is looking to. I don't know anything about these contracts, but usually there's a buyout, and I'm guessing that CLG is smart enough to put their buyouts pretty high. Given how kind of unstable NA rosters have been this season in general, so they probably can't take ThinkCard, and they probably can't take any of the other teams or any of the other junglers locked in by contracts. So if we're talking about guys on or non contracted players at this point, the pool is pretty limited, and I mean, Shorter Ace, I guess, is the only other option. He's apparently not interested. So is Zingy just the only choice at this point? Is that what it came down to?
As far as I know, Shorter Ace and Liquid or Nori were the other 3 options, or the other 2 options. So it was those 2 and a Ziggy, and those were your 3 options. So, and they chose the worst out of the 3, in my opinion, in terms of talent. So.
I kind of agree there. And again, I'm still waiting to hear the explanation as to why Cloud Nguyen was your guy 3 weeks ago and isn't now. We haven't seen anything that explains that in a satisfactory way. And I think if you're a Dignitas fan, that's disheartening. With all these other decisions, we can at least kind of see a rationale behind it. There's some, we can point to things like, oh, well, Wicked was underperforming, but now Kevin's underperforming. So, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're, if you understand that stability is key to these kinds of, moving forward. But you can at least talk yourself into the logic that got them to where they are. I don't see where the logic was that Cloud Nien was no longer the guy. And I'm just really struggling to see what their goal is from here, because now they have 2 terrible games and drop a game to Team 8, which was a really winnable game that they would have needed if they wanted to avoid relegations. And I don't see how, when you look at their upcoming schedule, they turn this around. They still have to play, I think they still have to play Cloud9 again. They have to play CLG again. They have to play Gravity again. They luckily don't have to play TSM again. But it's really rough. It's really hard to imagine Dignitas climbing out of this. And when things were going so well, I guess the reason I'm focusing on it so much is because things were finally turning around at least a little bit for them, and they just slashed their momentum. And to me, there needs to be an adequately explained reason for that.
Well, I mean, are you saying things turned around for them at least a little bit in terms of Cloud Nguyen? Like, is that what you're talking about?
He was a major upgrade over what Crumbs was doing. His KDA was not much better, but his ability to get other people going, specifically Gamsu, was a lot better when he was around. He did a good job of getting he and Shifter going, and Azingi has none of that chemistry.
Azingi is a solo queue jungler. He's never done well on a team, and he plays cheese in solo queue like Karthus and like Pantheon, who's ridiculously broken in solo queue and shits on kids in solo queue. Doesn't do it in competitive play.
But
so I mean,
to say that Cloud Nguyen is like Nguyen or Cloud Wen, which is such a big upgrade over Crumbs or Zingy when they beat Team 8 and Winter Fox, is like, okay. I mean, sure, they lost to Team 8 in the other game, but that game wasn't like some sort of ridiculously it was one-sided. I'm mixing up my Team 8 games, but
Dignitas just looked good with Cloudwind. Like, they came out one of the games and just like they played like old Dignitas, like beginning of last summer. Like, it was just smooth. Like, top lane, mid lane get going. Like,
okay, that's excessive.
And it's
I think okay. So here's the thing. Just to keep this in check, like, once again, we're talking about like beating Winter Fox here. So coming strong out of the gate is not the most impressive thing, and I think we can't call them old
Gamsu
Dignitas
versus Avalon, like, you can't. They're not old Dignitas. They didn't look like old Dignitas with Cloud Nguyen. Like, that's excessive. I don't.
But they're obviously better. Like, they were obviously better.
I mean, they picked a bad jungler, but to immediately say that Cloud Nguyen was benched because of an interview and that he was like some god among men and he was better than Crumbs is kind of
obviously when Crumbs was at his peak, he was one of the better junglers in like NA, but that's long gone. And like, it's like, I guess the best way to say it is we have like a bracket of the teams, right? And like the bottom 4 teams, Dignitas looked okay for 2 weeks, like, and just considering bottom 4. And then, like, now it's just, like, it's gone. Like,
I should point out Cloud Nguyen was also there for their win against Team Liquid.
And technically, Azingi lost the same number of games as Cloud Nguyen. Like,
Cloud Nguyen was their week 3, so they did beat Team Liquid during that time. So they went 3-3 over 6 games, which is compared to going 1-5 in their other games. They haven't had a jungler with a KDA that gets to at least 1, except for Cloud Nguyen, who had double that. And yes, let me make this clear: Cloud Nguyen, not a great jungler. If I'm a top tier team, no, I'm not feeling great about him. He is no god amongst men.
So yeah, so why not try someone else? So why not try someone else out?
Well, okay. So and here's my thing is that it's like
Azingi didn't work out. Okay, that's fine. Like, Azingi wasn't a good pick, but they tried someone because they weren't satisfied.
That Cloudwind was there for some of the games where they performed well, but he played like a solid J4, some pretty other mediocre games. Like, his vision control was never great. Like, you can say that maybe he was an improvement over Crumbs just because obviously Crumbs wasn't happy in that scenario and wasn't communicating well with the team. But like, his vision control was bad, and it's clear that he doesn't have as much experience. So I agree that if he was benched, I don't think it's because of that. Or no, if he was benched, I don't think it was because of the interview. I think you could just as easily make the argument that he was benched for lackluster performance. And at this point, like, Dignitas is in the shitter. Let's be honest. Like, they're out, down and out. So if they just want to keep cycling people out to see if something's going to click, to see if they can find someone who's going to get along well with the team and work well with the team, like, they have no hope this split. The most they can hope for is not getting 10th place. So at this point, I understand making these kind of desperate roster moves, at least to a certain degree, if they're planning to do better in the next split. At least that's from my perspective. Dignitas, that's how I would justify it if I was Dignitas.
I get that to some extent. I wish that if you're trying out junglers like that, maybe you give Cloud and Yen more than 3 weeks before you give up on. It just really, you know, his
3 weeks when they're like that's
when they went
that's a
3
third
and 3
of the split.
And we don't know anything about their scrims.
But that's a third of the split.
We don't know anything about their scrims, too. We don't know anything about his scrim performance.
We don't know anything about scrims. We don't know anything about all these things. And I agree on all these counts. Maybe I'm drawing conclusions too quickly. We have seen this pattern of behavior before, and I can't help but think about it. That's all. That's my only point.
Where have we seen this pattern of behavior? Like, what have we seen? Like, what pattern of this is the thing that I don't get. Like, Odie having a pattern of behavior for smacking people down for shooting their mouth off doesn't make any sense, given the fact that Odie like shoots his mouth off a lot, frankly, and he doesn't like, and he generally like doesn't really hold it against people. So I just don't understand like this argument. He has a pattern of behavior.
I mean, if you look at the summoning insight thing where he got fined for lashing out when people were criticizing him there, I mean, we can point to things. It's not really, it's not that big of a deal. Like you said, Team Dignitas is the ninth place.
Like probably intoxicated and making. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, okay, so maybe OD does have admittedly a reputation for having a temper, but we don't know anything about much of anything about his behind the scenes management at all. And
you know that Crumbs, when he left, called it one of the most toxic atmospheres he's ever seen, and that he wouldn't want to go.
Yeah,
he would never want to play in a situation
because there was like nothing going on. Like, not necessarily because of Odie. Did he like
overall
Odie? I don't understand the Odie circle jerk hate.
Overall,
like a lot of
still
stuff
think
that he gets blamed for isn't necessarily like even happening.
I think Dignitas is going to be the ninth place team by the end of the split, and I believe they'll probably get relegated by Fusion. So, like, actually out of the league. I don't see them turning anything around, and Fusion and Enemy are pretty good at the moment, so, yeah.
Okay, well,
and if that's the case, why not try out other junglers anyway? Like, Crumbs was supposed to kind of be the core of their team and like the star of their team, and so
and
they can't just like replace that with someone who's kind of doing okay. And like Cloud Nguyen, it wasn't Crumbs at his peak. Wasn't the Crumbs that they wanted. Like, Crumbs obviously wasn't the Crumbs that they wanted either, but neither was Cloud Nguyen. So like trying someone else out makes sense.
I think
That's all I'm saying.
I understand.
What is it going to take to make a Zingy work? Let's focus. Let's say you're Dignitas right now and you're trying out a Zingy. What does it take to make a Zingy work? Because despite the fact that we know that he's known for Fiddlesticks and Karthus, like, he's been playing in the challenger scene for a while, and you can say that he hasn't had the best results, but he has slowly been swapping to meta picks, especially this season. And like, is a Zingy a jungler that could work? I mean, Dig has a ton of problems. So can they make a Zingy work to keep themselves in 9th, maybe 8th place?
Going into the split, like, we would say Porpoise Pops was probably the worst jungler in terms of talent. Like, looking at it before we saw results, and I would put a Zingy below Porpoise and Impaler right now, and they're both playing not too well. So,
Porpoise is doing great. I'm going to disagree with you on that. If you give me Porpoise from a Zingy, that's a 4.39 KDA. That's 5th in the league in gold per minute for your position. I'll take that any day. And I think Dignitas would too.
I think KDA is not always the best way to look at someone, especially for junglers. Like, ward control is all I care about, and a Zingy's... Actually, I will say this: a Zingy has been better on ward control than Cloud Nguyen, at least a little bit, and that is going to be a start already.
Yeah, I mean,
his
I just
strategy
don't think they're going to turn anything around. I think they're pretty much stuck to 9th or 8th.
Let's talk about high KDA junglers, shall we? There's this guy named Clear Love. The amount of times he
God.
ganks like the entire split, I could probably count on one hand. He has like the highest KDA at LPL right now. Quality high pressure jungler right there. Good job. Like he does have really high kill participation, but that's because he gets it from like team fighting and skirmishes. I mean like let's not
Corvus
talk
Pops
about
also
KDA
leads-
and junglers.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're worried about not getting enough kills, I mean, he leads junglers in kills. I think that I happen to be a bigger fan of Porpoise Pops than most. I just think with what he's surrounded with, he's done a very good job of getting
and
some pressure.
Maybe they could try Porpoise Pops. Like
Trying
out a Zingy doesn't discount trying out other junglers.
I mean,
I just like overall, I don't think they're gonna turn anything around. Like they're gonna be stuck in one of the bottom 3 spots, and they're going to go to relegations, and they're going to face like Enemy or Fusion. Like they're kind of fucked. Like
as
overall,
I want to like okay, well,
this has been said before about challenger teams also.
Okay,
yeah,
so,
but you have 2 that are finally living in a gaming house and finally have their shit together. So
if I'm painting the picture in which Zingy looks best, I think that scenario is going to be focusing on that vision game and getting the getting everything. I'm sorry. I'll stop.
No, okay.
We're just not staying on topic. I think Daniel is like.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay on topic because I want to go off on jungle talent and why Saint Vicious is for some reason above everybody else in fucking jungle talent.
Oh
anyway,
my God.
Anyway.
Can we not talk about Saint Vicious?
No, we're not.
Please no.
We have a
Please
track
no.
talking about Saint Vicious on this show, and let's just say it's not so hot. Anyway, okay, so Dig, we'll put them in
He's
their
going to
little
become a high gank, low farm jungler now.
We'll go
That's his
ahead.
goal.
We'll go ahead and just lay Dignitas to rest in the coffin, put
There we
him on
go.
the river,
Whatever,
let
yeah.
him
Set him on the side.
sail away.
Let's give a Zingy.
Why are we even
ever
talking about Dignitas?
We were talking about a Zingy. He took AP runes. It's
AP
cute,
runes,
right?
man.
Do you see what you've done, Daniel? You've torn us all apart. We're
Do you know
fighting
who
and
else
we're off
took-
topic. It's
No.
terrible.
He
Don't
took
you-
no
don't-
masteries. That's what Piglet did. Okay.
That's true.
All
Nothing
right.
happened.
Well, here, let's just skip ahead a little bit. We'll jump back. Speaking of Piglet, he's gone.
TLDR, people screw up.
TL, yeah, I mean, it happens. It's cute more than anything. Anyway, Team Liquid, Keith McBrief, doing better now, suddenly. Surprisingly, who would have thought that everyone on their team speaking English would have helped them?
Keith. Hashtag keep Keith.
I mean,
And more specifically, Quaz is looking like Quaz again. I mean, man, it's fun watching him play the last couple of weeks. But
Yeah.
earlier in the split, his numbers were way down, and he was really, he was doing fine. He was holding his own, but he wasn't being that playmaker that we'd gotten used to and who'd shown, so much whenever you looked at these advanced metrics. And he's become that guy again. And I think that's been really big for Liquid because it means that you can have him and hopefully Phoenix kind of act, and I Will Dominate, I should say, acting as these hard carry roles. And Piglet, Piglet was hard to fit in because Piglet's a guy who needs a lot of farm, a lot of resources on his own to push himself forward and be the Piglet that everyone knows and loves. But when you look at Keith, he's a guy who very much fits in with that idea of, I'll let Quaz and I Will Dominate be these big guys that get the kills and can kind of get going. Let's Phoenix do his thing. And then I can follow along and help with the objectives and with my positioning and, being where the team needs, doing what the team needs me to do at that time. And I think that's, it's kind of nice to see that gel together.
okay, well, here's my thing. I don't think that it has anything to do with so much Piglet's style of play as it does with Piglet's attitude, and I'm willing to bet his inability to speak English. I think he obviously is very frustrated with the situation he's in, if those reports of him, like, rage quitting scrims or whatever are true. And it seems like not a healthy environment for him, which is fine. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, but the dude is basically like a mama's boy, very used to his mom, maybe a little codependency there, like has never really been outside of Korea, outside of competing for League, is brought onto this NA team, and despite all those like nice fluff videos of Liquid trying to make him feel welcome, I mean, you need more than that. Like if I just went to another, like, never gonna happen obviously, but if I was good enough at League to just go to Korea and I was sat in a house with 4 other people mad at me all the time because I could not communicate with them, like that would be a nightmare.
Well, another thing to note is Piglet hasn't been good in a year. Like, the last time we saw Piglet, like, oh my god, this guy is a great AD carry, like OGN winner 2013. Like there was a whole 2014.
Wasn't awful though either.
Yeah, but
Like,
and it wasn't
yeah.
awful in highly competitive Korea too. I mean, like that was the
Yeah.
season when Korea was like nuts for competition. Any one of those Korean teams that went to Worlds, well, oh Samsung White.
Yeah, they almost did go to Worlds again. Like they were fairly close to it.
I think you can make the argument that Keith fits better into Liquid, but I think that's because Keith is young, he's impressionable and happy to be on a team, and I think that all he needs to do is be in the right place and auto attack.
There was an special vlog about it yesterday talking about the two, and the biggest thing he like talked about Keith is excited to be there. Like Keith is like, oh my god, that's like Bjergsen, like that's this like star player, and he's just like a kid in like a freaking candy shop. He's like, or like a toy store. Like he's just excited to be there, and therefore like he's happy.
Today I
like,
learned 7-year-olds belong on LCS teams. Like that's all you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, hold on. I mean, like, okay, but there's
I
thing to say.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Positive attitude is very important, and you have to be willing to mesh with the team. And I think if you are in awe of all these famous pro players, you know, I think it will help your attitude with the team. You'll be like, especially on a team that already has a pretty established play style and way of doing things, I think it's important to just be able to come in with an open mind and mesh in. And obviously Keith has done that. And I think you can easily make the argument that Keith is worse than Piglet, but definitely better for Liquid as a team, this split at least.
That's what I was...
Piglet, like, he's worse than Piglet in terms of raw talent. Like, in terms of, like, who they are as players. But in terms of like attitude, he is that mesh. Like he's just happy. Like he's happy to be a part of everything, and therefore he's performing well because he's mechanically good and he's a happy person. So like,
to reference back to Dignitas, if there's anything we've learned, team cohesion is very important, and that you can't just trade it out for mechanically skilled players, even Korean.
Nah, that is absolutely
like,
true.
Piglet's won Worlds. He's won OGN. He gets to eat Cheetos and make money.
Yeah, no.
He doesn't necessarily need to prove himself like Keith does. I think is the other factor.
Yeah.
I also think in my dream scenario here is that Piglet is like off to the side, still talking and training with the team, playing a bunch of solo queue, you know, working really hard to stay relevant. And then next he's going to come in, have this great relationship, and it's going to be awesome. And Keith is just this temporary thing. More likely, he's sitting there getting more and more bitter every day because he's trapped in NA, playing solo queue, streaming for money. I mean, I can't imagine it ending well, but I have a dream, and
the special blog.
I have a dream.
The special blog talked about like long-term versus short-term and how that is going to make a big decision for them. But Keith graduates in May, and he's done. Like, he could just go pro and not have to ever worry about school again if he wants to. Like, that's his choice now. So
I have to say, I think we have not seen the last of Piglet, but I don't think it's going to be here. I think this relationship, you know, you can, you know, even just the interviews we saw with the organization when they, you know, confirmed that this was going to be more than just a temporary thing. You know, they seemed very much to have accepted, like, okay, this didn't work out, we're going to move forward. You know, obviously, you know, if things do work out, that's wonderful. But they seemed, you know, they have the plan in their head. They're very happy proceeding the way that they are, and I think it might be better for just both organizations, both parties, I should say. If Piglet finds another place where he can kind of, you know, where you can build a team around his skill set rather than trying to fit his skill set into an already established team.
I also think, like, a lot of people think it's like, oh, they, like, don't like Koreans over at Team Liquid. Like, they're it's this, like, cultural shock. Well, like, look at their mid laner. He fits in with, like, the rest of the team.
Who said that? That's my question. Where is this argument come up that people don't like Koreans? People, have you lived in NA? People fucking love Koreans. We irrationally love Koreans.
It's not like the fact that they don't like them. It's just like the culture difference, like how different Piglet is culturally to the rest of that team.
It's hard.
But Phoenix kind of just like chills, and Phoenix has been doing, like, he's not the star mid laner of NA, but he's definitely not a shitter. So
I like Phoenix's performance. I just can't imagine it's like a cultural thing. I think if anyone's going to be upset with the culture, it would be Piglet, and because he comes from Korean gaming culture, which I think in general can be viewed as a lot more serious and a lot more strict. But
it could also be what like Kelsey was like talking about. Like this guy's won like the best league in the world on multiple occasions, like, and also won the whole entire world championship. Like compared to like Phoenix, who wasn't really a big deal in Korea.
He's described as like a very prideful person, so I don't think that's necessarily like it in a nutshell. But if you're talking about
like attitude-wise, looking at like in an LCS, like I gotta go.
There are a lot of factors as to why he didn't work out.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you come in expecting to be a first place team in your first split, that's not gonna happen. I mean, maybe Fnatic.
Unless you're Cloud9.
This team had the chance on paper. Like they have one of the best junglers in NA. They have an extremely good top laner, like pretty decent mid laner, and arguably like up there with Lustboy and Lemon at best support in their special. So it was possible, but yeah, forever fourth.
That's fair.
So.
I mean, they're obviously on the rise. I think overall, do you think the Keith choice is the right choice for Liquid, or do you think they should have stuck with Piglet and just waited it out in the long term?
I think even though like sticking with Piglet, like it is just spring split, they can get their stuff together for summer, but on the same like train of thought rather, like they stick with Keith. You have a player who's like 17, like he's only done this for a bit, but he's really mechanically skilled, and you can train him to be a monster. And if there's any organization that's going to do that, then it's the one with a lot of money and a huge support staff. So, I mean, yeah, basically. I think long-term Keith is better.
I mean, I think they're forced into a place where they have to make a short-term decision just because there are only so many games in LCS now. Like 18 is a really short league. So.
I mean, especially if you're coming from China.
Regardless of whether Piglet would be the long-term choice or what the long-term choice would be, like they had to make a short-term decision, I think.
Yeah,
and
they were
think
losing.
It's paid off for them so far.
As we said, they were losing to Dig. I mean,
Jesus.
We went over this.
That is true.
Okay, well, no one go back to Dig. No one, don't do it. I know we want to talk about Dig more. I know we do. We love him for some reason, but let's talk about a team that has learned from the experience of randomly bringing in Koreans, and that's CLG. Now a Korean-free roster, I suppose.
All Americans, boys.
All Americans, and in true CLG fashion, they are now. I guess we'd call it a slump. We could call it being terrible.
They're still number 2 in NA? Like they're not like in the gut. So
they're losing and they're losing badly, and they're doing stupid things, and that is.
But who did they lose to this last week? Was it?
This last week,
Winter Fox
no, this
they beat Winter Fox easily.
And then they lost to Liquid.
Yeah.
And then in the previous week they beat Dignitas and then lost to Cloud9. So you could say, I mean, the Cloud9 loss is a good loss. If there is such a good thing as a good loss, that would be it.
Even the Liquid loss is like that. It's still a top 4 team at the end of the day. Like,
but it's not the top 2 that they were, and I think that this is the team kind of falling back to where we probably thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. I mean, we've seen this before, right? CLG tends to do really well early in the split, and then as it goes on, we see kind of less of a return, and we don't see if you talk to these teams, they still think that CLG is a very good team. They're still very worried about them. Scrims apparently are going very well for them. That's something that's always gone well for CLG, but I don't. It's hard to say exactly what it is you can point to with these guys because it's not individual skill. Link's done fine this split. He's done more than fine this split, and Xmithy has outplayed my expectations for sure. I just think their decision making is not quite there. They're making
fighting is really bad too.
Yeah, so this is the thing I want to talk about in the Liquid game. That is the only. So they're fighting above Baron Pit. They're coming into mid lane, and they group in such a way that made Zed's damage output huge. I don't really know how to explain this in other terms. They positioned so poorly. Zed became a better team fight mid laner than whoever they had picked, which I believe was Ezreal. They grouped, and Zed got his entire combo off on multiple people. They pinholed themselves in, and he still had ult after this and was able to ult to carry. And like at that point, after that initial fight, this is like 20 minutes into the game, that's when things started to go in Liquid's favor. Because Liquid was still like having kind of a rougher early game, but it seems to me like every split CLG has, obviously solid mechanical skills. And for the most part, their map movement is reasonably decent. But when it comes to teamfight and specifically teamfight positioning, they shit the bed all the time. Like, all the time. They always put themselves in these horrible positions, and I don't understand how that happens.
It just seems like lack of shot calling, to be honest. If you look at the TSM game, which was a bit ago, it had the same problem. Specifically, the last fight, like they absolutely like crapped on everybody early game and had such a gold lead. And the last fight, where like they just lost the game, Zion like hit Meganar, hit 4 people, and Link was sitting there throwing Lysandre Qs on a hard engage champion, and it's just like, dude, why are you not like Eing in, like flashing in, like taking Sivir? Like I know Wild Turtle did block it with Spell Shield, but it's still like, you could have been so much more useful there. And I think it's just inexperience from shot calling because I think their shot callers Aphromoo and Link are those two.
But that should not be an experience, though. That's a concern because I mean, Aphramoo's been here for over a year. Link's been here for over a year. How are these guys inexperienced at shot calling? It's not, to me. It just seems like they kind of fall into these same mistakes. Link in high pressure situations, we see him kind of buckle under the pressure, and he does well. His laning phase is really good, but in those team fights when they really need him, he does really weird things. The Lysandre ult on himself and the TSM thing that he just doesn't put it all together when they really need him to. Smithy's another guy that I don't think necessarily does great after the laning phase.
Smithy's he's a solid average, like, NA jungler, and I was having this discussion with someone else that used to play in NALCS that I won't name basically, he's an average jungler in terms of NALCS, but he's not, like, a Meteos. Like, he's not, like, star top tier. He used to be, like, Season 3, but not anymore.
But once again, like we just talked about sorry, go ahead, Kelsey, you've been waiting.
The thing with CLG, and I feel like they've kind of had this problem for a little while, even last year to an extent, is that they have sort of an AD carry that excels in team fighting that doesn't really get to do kind of what he does in the late game, and ends up like in these like positional weird situations where he just like doesn't get damage off just because the team as a whole isn't a team fighting team.
Into an Ahri.
So just because the team as a whole isn't a team fighting team and they're not exactly like working well in that space, they're not fighting in the correct terrain, they're not using the right power spikes during their team. Like they're not picking fights at the right times during the game. Like again, and then like last year they were always the rotational team, and I felt that they had kind of the same issue even then, is that they could make these like they almost had to avoid fights because it was just this issue that they couldn't figure out. So they lose probably the power of their AD carry, and he ends up being like a non-factor just because they can't figure out the team fight in general.
And it seems to me like they're aware that they have this because they pick team fighting compositions to a certain degree. Not in all of their games, but to a certain degree. And I mean, I will say, this is the thing about Xmithie in general. I don't think he's that bad. I think he's a solid jungler, and I think he works well with the team. And I think given the team's history of having a less than positive environment, if he works well with the team, keep him. All the more power to you. Like, I wouldn't let him play Nidalee anymore because I saw that man miss way too many spears.
Right.
But I think in general he's a strong jungler. He's obviously very competent. His Lee Sin is still as solid as ever, and I think that in general, like, he can just play like the time right now. Jungle as a whole is not really that complex. I mean, if you look at the strongest junglers you have, like J4, Vi, Rek'Sai, I guess we can say Nidalee, maybe Nunu, depending on like how your region's stacking up. So I think overall his champion pool is solid for what the jungle needs to do, and I think he does well for the team. But I think that my bigger concern is I think either team communication as a whole or team coaching, because one of two things is happening.
Coaching then.
well, one of two things is happening to me in these team fights. People aren't like Zion isn't saying I'm going to get this gnarled, and people just isn't communicating that, or and so Link doesn't know to follow up if Link is in fact a dedicated shot caller, or alternatively, the staff and the coaching staff keeps saying, hey, play this composition, play this, without explaining why. And as a result, now we have these situations where they know technically what their team comp is supposed to do, but because they don't know the why of why it does well or what it does well, when it comes to making intuitive decisions or they start to force awkward fights, they instantly shit the bed because they don't understand why their team comp works. And if it's not this exact situation as it has been laid out for them, they just suck. And that's a little bit of a ridiculous theory, but that's my idea in general.
I think Scarra and Zix, I know specifically kind of what Zix does, but they were supposed to have a third analyst for that team, Comley, who kind of did a lot of that like team fight coordination stuff in terms of analyzing for Dignitas. And he was like under Scarra at Dignitas when they were doing well towards the beginning of that split. And he was supposed to tag along with CLG, but he decided he didn't want to. So I think it kind of is a coaching problem because I know Zix is very pick band oriented, and I'm not specifically sure what Scarra like focuses on a lot, but it just seems like a mesh problem. But like attitude wise, that team meshes pretty well. So in terms of like friends. So.
I mean, on the bright side, Scarra has such a great history on Dignitas of closing out games and making sure that you don't throw away victories in your grasp. It's a nice foundation to build off of. But I honestly, I don't want to say anything about Scarra yet because he's only been with the team for a few weeks. But it is one of those things where I'm looking to see how they adjust when the playoffs come around. Because really, we can talk about CLG all day long. The regular season at this point is almost meaningless with them because when it comes to the playoffs, that's when we've seen them kind of have these collapse after collapse after collapse. And that high-pressure environment, are they going to be able to make the calls that they need to make and fix those team fighting issues that, as Kelsey pointed out, have been there for a long time with a lot of these same people? That's the part I want to see. And I right now, little blips, I don't mind little blips in the regular season as long as there's a corrective issue. I've never seen the correction for CLG where I said, man, they're a great team fighting team now that they fixed X, Y, and Z. And until they finally figure out what it is that's really locking them down, we're going to see the same problem every time. Which is just a shame because the talent's there.
I don't think spring split's a big deal for them either because I think they can resolve a lot of their problems by summer. I don't see them making any roster changes from then till now. So, like, looking at the top 5 teams, the only people that I think I think the top 4 consistently can give them issues, like themselves included, like Liquid, C9, and TSM. Gravity maybe, but I think they've got at least top 5 after playoffs. Like, there's no reason they should be below 5th by the end of the split.
Before we close this CLG discussion out, you say that they can solve their problems in spring or before summer split starts through this spring split. Like, so what do you think the answer is? Do you think the answer is more coaching staff? Do you think it's better team communication? I mean, how do they solve these problems that they currently have?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's specifically focusing on that issue. I think and I'm sure they're probably on top of it because Scarra is a pretty productive person. Like, I don't know. I think they once that's focused and dealt with, I think they'll be fun because that really seems to be their main weakness, and the better teams are what are exploiting it. Like Team Liquid has some of the better shot calling in terms of Dominate and Xpecial, and C9 has Meteos and Lemon and High, and in terms of shot calling, and TSM has Bjergsen and Lust Boy. So it's and the people who are giving you shit are the people that are extremely good at doing this. So it's not like
TSM has good shot calling.
Questionables at times.
They have
but
good
other
team
times
fighting. They're able to exploit because TSM has had good team fighting. TSM has been a team fighting team for pretty much ever.
It's just it's not like I would say jump the boat from CLG right now because honestly I don't see anybody outside the top 4 giving them any shit, and the top 4 teams are historically pretty good at team fighting. So yeah.
I'll say this for it. I think at some point too, you also have to consider the the personal factor of this. I mean, these guys have come so close in so many big games, and eventually that starts to feel like a monkey on your back, right? We talk about this in traditional sports all the time, this idea of like, you have this hump in front of you and you just, every time you fail to reach it, you feel, it gets in your head and it sticks with you. And you have to wonder just in the way, whether it be double lift or link, sometimes they make these moves, these reactions that that just feel like it's a little bit of a panic. And you saw it, you saw it at Spring Split when Nien was, crying after they lost that game 2 to TSM. We've seen nerves get these guys, and at some point I almost feel like maybe it would be better suited trying to deal with that aspect of it, because it's such, there's so much pressure on them being, the second largest, I would say, organization in North America in terms of just, these old school fans that have followed them forever, and they desperately want to win. Every time you talk about this team, you're like, they want something in the trophy case. They want to show like, yes, we won something. And when you have that kind of pressure on you, that can sometimes make it hard to see the little things, and you get so caught up in those moments, you can kind of get swept away by it. And that's, I can't, I'm not an inner working of CLG. I can't say that that's the case, but that's the impression I've gotten in interviews and things that I've seen from those guys. And I'd like to see maybe some more attention on that, getting these guys in a place where they feel comfortable and confident that if they're ahead in a game against TSM, they can close it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move over to Cloud9, just because I think there's a lot more to be speculated about CLG, but I will say that to a certain degree, they have in the past had those emotional issues, either through team compatibility or otherwise. But for our final NA team, as Kelsey lets out a giant sigh, we'll get to China. I promise we'll get to China.
No, it's cool. I'm thinking about CLG, and it just makes me sigh.
Yeah, I'm a CLG fan. You got to understand, it's hard.
I'm a CLG CSGO fan, and I'm an Afromu and Zion Spartan fan. So, I kind of support their organization. So I hope they get their shit together.
If it makes all of you guys feel better, I was a Coast fan during Season 4 when that collapse happened.
Oh, God, no.
There was not enough rum in the world to make that series of games okay. It was a rough time.
All right.
I liked Zion and Shifter, but the rest of that team, ugh.
All right. Cloud9, 4-0. Keep in mind, before we get too excited about this Cloud9 4-0, that they beat Coast, Winterfox, Impulse, and, of course, the wonderful CLG that we just talked about. So, Cloud9 doing better, more consistently at least, against bottom teams, which is important. But coming up with matches against the top teams, or, well, higher-up teams at least, what do we think we can expect from Cloud9? Do we think they have their stuff figured out? And what's been the make-or-break thing for them? Why have they been performing better recently?
If I could point to one thing, I wrote an article a couple weeks ago about the state of North America and the race for third, as I called it. And one of the things I pointed out is that, well, you could say a lot of things about High's play at the time, and a lot of people were. No one was noticing the fact that Balls was in the lower half in terms of KDA and gold per minute. He was not the player that we were used to, and some of that was targeted bans. People kind of saw that as a thing to kind of hold back. But some of it was just he wasn't feeling as comfortable, it seemed, in where the meta was at the time. And now, you saw him play his Rumble. His Rumble is incredible, and he's feeling a lot more comfortable. And his KDA and gold permitted numbers have skyrocketed, top of the position in KDA, second in gold permitted in North America. And that is just, considering where he was, that's a massive leap. That means that he's been performing like crazy these last couple of weeks. And if you can point to any one thing, it's that he and High have both had much better performances, which makes Meteos' stuff more effective, which means that there's less pressure on Sneaky to have to carry on his own, and it just makes for a Cloud9 team that feels a lot more like the Cloud9 team we probably expected going into the season.
Well, I think, once again, that the reliance on KDA and gold per minute is not what you want to look at. And I will say that I think in general Cloud9 has suffered. I think Meteos especially has suffered through the changes to the jungle. And I think that they're just taking a while to adapt. And obviously the team has a lot of issues. But I think consistency is going to be a big part for this team. I think they've always been a smart team as far as team fighting goes. I mean, obviously, I think season 3 is not a good indication of that, just because the comps that they picked were so absolutely team fight focused that it was almost impossible for them to lose those team fights. But more recently, I still think they have shown competence. I think Balls is a fantastic Rumble player. Always has been, probably, I mean, always will be one of the best in NA, probably as long as his career continues, and that's obviously a very important champion.
Or if you're Zyrene, the best Rumble player in the world.
Well,
oh god, that
world,
tweet.
Dan.
In the world. Well,
In the world, Dan.
he's landed some good. He's better than Aluka, and Aluka's our China champion for IAM Academy. All right, I'm done.
Aluka has an LPL title, Dan. You watch your mouth.
We're going to talk later about how he had a decent game and what that means for the world. Oh god, yeah, you're dreading it too. Anyway, so I think Cloud9 has the potential to do well, but like the thing about Cloud9 is that I've never been a huge Cloud9 fan. I've always followed them to a certain degree. So for me, I really honestly don't know what to expect, which is I suppose why I posed this question. Jacob, what are your thoughts on Cloud9?
Well, I'm a Cloud9 fan, so yeah, this is right at home. I don't know. I think they're finally back on the horse. I think they just hit a speed bump. Kind of what I said with SK the other day on Twitter. I said once you just because you hit a bump doesn't mean you wreck the car. Like the car is still gonna go hitting the speed bump. But I don't know. I just think overall Cloud9's gonna be fine. In the long run, I still think at the end of the split they'll be top 2 in A. So at least top 3, at least. But I don't know. It just seems like everything's coming back together. So they're all 5 really. High has always been the only question mark player, but what he provides to the team atmosphere and team shot calling is pretty irreplaceable to any other player. So,
all right, well, we'll have to see in the coming weeks. Obviously, 4-0 was pretty solid for them, and I think there were some pretty good games from Cloud9. I'll hold you to that this is them back on the horse, and I'm hoping for a solid split for the rest of Cloud9. But if not, we'll bring you back on and burn. But did they play Hecarim?
Surprisingly, no. Surprisingly, Balls' Hecarim has yet to surface. I'd actually really like to see it, just to see what happens from it. Oh god. Oh, Hecarim.
I still just think I really want to see them at IEM, and I know we're not gonna talk a lot about that, but they're in the same bracket with GE and SK, and we'll see Cloud9. I think they'll make it out of groups at IEM, hopefully. So
we'll learn a lot either way for sure.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see really truly how they are.
All right. Well, let's jump to the other Riot-approved top region, which would be EU. I know. No one would have guessed that. Krepo. So Krepo replacing Nif, and Wicked returning to Elements.
Woo!
The
Wicked homecoming party.
Okay, so I guess
they couldn't be without each other for too long.
That's a good theory, and that would. So does that mean we're not going to see any more roster swaps?
No. Here, I'm trying to see if I can find the quote that Wicked used 2 weeks ago when describing the team. I put it in the all chat earlier, but I can't. Wicked, when he left, said that the good news was that he was going to be glad to be gone. He described the atmosphere in his AMA upon leaving as being, quote, very shitty, where, quote, we had 500 different opinions of why it wasn't working out, and everyone took the losses really hard. When you're responding that way, and when you're saying oh, the good news is that I don't have to do this anymore. I'm going back to my apartment and getting these things set up. I think it says a lot that they after 2 weeks of Kevin, they realized their mistake and are like, no, Wicked, come back. You fit a role in this team that we didn't even realize how much we appreciated until you were gone, and hopefully.
You have an extra 100 opinions to throw into the mix that make it just particularly toxic for us as a whole.
Yeah, and that's the problem I have is I'd love to get excited about it because Wicked on paper is a more fun player to talk about than Kevin. He has people can criticize his champion pool all he wants, but he has worked on it. He has gotten better with it. He did. I know I'm not going to bring up any stats because every time I bring up stats, you guys.
I'm going to knock you. People value stats. I think they're wrong. That's my opinion. You're welcome to bring up stats.
It's absolutely fine.
No matter what, stats are good. It's about how you interpret them, sir.
Well, yeah, and that's. I understand. That's why I was But either way, I think you could say, regardless of whether you pay attention to the stats or not, I think Kevin did not show anything that particularly said he was an upgrade from Wicked, and Crepo, at least, you have that old CLG chemistry going, and maybe they try to work together. But to me, I think you guys hammered it on the show really well 2 weeks ago, that this is a team that makes a lot of gut moves, and they seem to do kind of, they would be like what happened if Reddit ran a team, I think was Raz's quote from that show, where, he talked about how, all these, quick gut reactions that Reddit has is, oh, this guy isn't good. Oh, this guy doesn't work. This guy would be, that when you're seeing these kinds of roster switches week after week after week, that's got to be at the very least emotionally draining. That's got to kill any chemistry that you're trying to build up, any momentum that you're trying to achieve as a team. And it'd be one thing, you can, as you guys pointed out with Dignitas, you can say, well, why not try other things? The season's lost anyway. But Element's season should not be lost. The fact that we're at this point where, if the season ended today, they wouldn't be relegated, but they would not make the playoffs. And that's crazy for a team that won Europe just 6 months ago.
So previously we've talked about how Elements seem absolutely convinced that endlessly swapping players is the solution to all of their problems, and a failure overall to recognize anything deeper than that. So with this continued trend, do you think anything is going to change with these swaps, or do you think it's just going to be more of the same Elements?
They play like solo queue, so why not swap out players, right? Like, no one pays any attention when someone, like when Kevin was... You can talk about how Kevin didn't have the numbers that showed that he was a better top laner than Wicked, but like, in that Rock Hack game, and I talked about this a little bit in my article, like, Jankos and Vander were in that lane, like, constantly, and... Elements didn't even react. Like, they didn't try to go for counter objectives. They didn't try to make moves on the other side of the map. They didn't try to support him in the gank. They didn't, Froggen didn't even try to steal the dragon with an arcane barrage. So they're just playing solo queue is the issue. So, yeah.
It's not. Kelsey, you missed it. It's their hashtag trademarked passive play style. It's not solo.
Oh my god.
It's not that they're passive. It's that they're solo queue players.
It's incredible, right? The SK win, and I think we're going to talk about SK in a little bit, but they've gone 1-3 in their last 4. It's become clear that SK really struggles when you put pressure on them early and abuse the fact that their warding is really subpar in the early to mid game. We saw 3 games of this. 3 games where teams, even Unicorns of Love, were able to kind of shut SK down in a very decisive game. And Element saw that and said, we'll go for our late game team comp anyway. That's the game we like to play. That's how we're going to play it. Who cares that SK wins that game every time that SK's played that type of game? To me, that says something about the coaching staff and the way that they're approaching these things. If it's not the coaching staff, then it means that the players aren't listening, because there isn't an analyst out there that would have recommended that composition to go up against SK. That game was over from picks and bans, in my opinion. But maybe you guys disagree.
It's almost just kind of like it has traditionally worked for Elements in the past too, and by traditionally I mean last year. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So, it's not terribly unreasonable, but it's almost like they're scared to try anything new at this point, because they still are a very fragile team, and they're trying to recapture the synergy and what worked for them last, which, from my perspective, Elements has never really had synergy. Like, that's when they were Alliance, I guess. We should talk about when they were Alliance, like the famous Copenhagen Wolves game, where everyone was just so impressed. Since we're talking about again SK Gaming versus Elements and the differences there, and that weekend where Copenhagen Wolves played SK Gaming and Elements or Alliance or whatever, and what they did is they just went around and they dove Froggen through the same gank path multiple times through the jungle, and then they tried the same strategy as SK, and SK warded and picked TF. I don't know. It's just this idea that they're not reacting, they're not preparing, they're not reacting as a group. Like, one player might react, but they don't have this back and forth, this give and take. They don't group. Like, the only time you get a kill is going to be like a solo kill, so that's how you know the players are good. But where there isn't any synergy, there isn't any sense of team play other than like eventually we're going to be grouped because because all the towers will be gone.
That's I mean, okay, so first of all, let me say I don't disagree, but that's a rather grim interpretation, albeit maybe an honest one of Elements. I mean,
I think it worked. I think it worked last year because there was a lot less early grouping and a lot less team play in Europe last year. Like, I'm not saying that the early grouping play style is necessarily superior, but when you're not used to playing against it, we've seen these teams like in Europe execute these early grouping play styles not well, but still win because it's so surprising, right? And they're just now starting to get used to this type of style. So if you're not, and it takes a little bit more team play earlier on to execute those kinds of styles to any level. So if you don't have that team play, like, you don't necessarily have to group early to execute team play, but if so, you can be in lane and you can be separated and you can still have the communication flow and you can say, okay, I'm gonna stay here, you guys do this on the map or whatever, and still have that kind of team play. But if you don't have any team play at all and someone else is executing an early group strategy, you're going to fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. And I guess to answer your question of, is that going to improve? I don't know. Are these guys going to feel like more of a team when, players are going in and out every week and, it kind of sends that message of everybody is replaceable if you don't perform the way we want.
Let's assume the theoretical where this roster right now sticks together for the rest of the split. Do you think things will get better?
By summer, maybe. And it comes from, finding a way to listen to the coach and realize that the game is changing and you have to be able to try new things and new ways to win, that just what happened last year isn't going to be enough this time around. And I think that, I wouldn't say that those players aren't capable of that. It just takes a shift in mentality, and that's going to take time. I think it's not going to happen by the end of this split. But I think that, come summer, if they keep this roster around, keep things steady, start, listening to the coach so that he doesn't have to, go out in public and say things like, well, I told him to do Vygar support, but they don't listen to me. I'd love to hear stuff like that stop happening. These kinds of things could really make a difference for this team. Whether they will or not, I think it's going to be up to them.
I think
they're just going to talk.
Yeah, they need to communicate with each other, and they need to be humble and accept that they're losing right now because they're bad and they're not playing correctly. But I don't think that's going to happen, quite honestly.
You need to accept that you're bad.
Well, if you want to get better, you need to acknowledge that you're not the best and that you can improve. So,
it's like that
there's
perfect...
no indication that they will, because they haven't, right?
Yeah, I just don't... Sure. I have no reason to believe that Elements will figure their shit out, basically.
Here's your best case scenario. Diamond, he had to get benched last year from Gambit for a couple weeks because his attitude was not conducive to the team. He wasn't listening to coaches. They felt like they had to sit him down. And he has, in his anger, he's like, oh, I'm going to stream. I'm going to broadcast the games. I'm going to do my commentary over them. And I'm going to talk about all this stuff. And, the first 5 or 10 minutes or so, things are going fine. Everything just seems normal. And then the team just collapses. And you see it on his, in his face. He just kind of gets more and more somber. He stops talking to people. He gets very quiet. And at the end, he just says, I get it now. I understand. And it took him watching this team and seeing it the way that all the fans were seeing it to realize just where things had gotten. And now this split, he's looking the best that he's looked in years. I mean, well, not years, because I guess League of Legends always feels longer than it actually is. But it's certainly, he certainly looked very good over the last few weeks.
Especially when you're watching Europe.
Yeah.
Oh my god, every game. All right, well let's talk about Gambit. Gambit's on the rise. Diamond Prox had that article come out where he said Leviathan helped him a lot with his perspective on the game and has helped his attitude. So with Leviathan now at the helm of the Gambit pick ban phase and apparently the overall strategy as a whole, they appear to be doing quite well. How good is new Gambit, I guess is my question.
Well, I guess the first question you have to ask is how much of, we've seen now 2 sets of 3 weeks, right? We saw Gambit go 1-5 in the first 3 weeks and 6-0 in the last 3. And, 2 things kind of happened that really turned things around for them. The first is that they got internet in their gaming house. That's something a lot of people kind of forget, is that it takes 3 weeks to set up internet in a German gaming house. They got the house at week 2, so week 4, when they started improving, that's when internet would have kicked on in their house. That makes a big difference for a team that's always built themselves around this idea of, the Russian boot camp, planning all these things out and coming up with, strategies and champions that people aren't necessarily thinking of. And Leviathan, I think, has been really instrumental, coming in around that same time as well. You look at the development of Cabochard and now, Betsy that's coming in. These are, guys that don't have a lot of LCS experience, but you certainly wouldn't know it from the way they're playing. These guys are both, Betsy for having zero experience that I could reasonably point to. I don't remember seeing him in the Challenger Series even, has looked really good. And yes, it's been 4 games, and that's sample sizes are sample sizes, but for a guy, you usually see young players like that have nerves, have kind of, play a little bit, make a couple early mistakes because they're not used to playing in that kind of atmosphere. And he never had those issues. That team felt prepared, and they felt like a team. Like it kind of feels like the anti-elements in that way, that these pieces individually, I'm not sure how any of them would all fit on other rosters, but on Gambit it works. And it's really nice to see, finally we're looking at a Gambit that doesn't have to fly back and forth to Russia with half their players all the time, that has a stable place to live and a stable coach and internet, and it's all the promise that we saw at IEM Cologne that immediately felt wiped away when all those things were taken away from them again. So I'm very high on Gambit. I think they could be a top 3 team.
Okay, well,
I think they're a Dragon Control team, and the Dragon Control has been doing pretty well, so they've been winning games. Yay!
Hey, Gambit. In that same vein of team, Jacob, do you have anything to say about Gambit before we move forward?
I don't know. I think they finally got their stuff together a little bit. I think Betsy's not too bad. The past 4 games have been pretty good, and if you think about it, 4 games is a fifth of a season now, because there's only 20 games in a season. So he's been doing okay. Pinoy is a pretty average AD carry. He's really aggressive. They've been playing kind of his play style. Cabochard is the non-Russian god that the Russian team deserves, and yeah, he's been doing really well. So, and Diamond's been back on his game.
That's fair.
He's looking like a solid jungler again. So, solo lanes are doing well. Jungler's doing well. Support's pretty on it at the moment. And AD carry's right-clicking and killing everyone. So, yeah, it's kind of how things are going for them. They seem to kind of be getting back into the move after going 0-5. So, thank goodness.
Well, they seem like a functioning team.
Finally.
Our standards are very low.
Our standards are very low. We spent like an hour talking about Dignitas.
Dignitas.
We spent an hour talking about Dig. Our standards have been lowered. Okay, H2K. Before we go off on another tangent.
They have a clear.
Finally.
They pick like teams that do well off dragons. They get the dragons. Like it's just very straightforward. They're making a decision. They're coming up with like a plan, even if it's simple, and they're executing it well. Yay!
A simple plan executed well is always better. And teams seem to forget that in lieu of following what Korean teams do. I think is the habit that a lot of people still have, Korean or Chinese teams these days, actually. And they just forget that it's much better to execute a strategy well. And I think Gambit is, like Kelsey said, a good example of that when it comes to Dragon Control. But H2K got Kasing playing way better now.
I will gladly talk about this team.
Here, run us down with H2K. Give us insight.
Coming into the split, I really thought H2K was going to be pretty good. They were pretty fucking solid in the expansion tournament, and try to keep up with Challenger a lot. They got two solid coaches for the expansion tournament. Looked really impressive. Top laner has always been Odoamne has always been really good. Lulex is pretty average. Forbidden was a god, but I think the Ryu change was in their favor. There was a few interviews about it when it happened, but they finally have a more team fight minded mid laner instead of Forbidden, who was kind of like, I'm going to go do my thing and just absolutely shit on everyone because I'm that good mechanically, which is kind of the way that player plays. Bot lane, AD Carry has been playing really well because he's not someone you'd think would be a top AD Carry. Yarnan is pretty solid. And Kasing actually is probably the addition of Kasing I think is great because Voidal is decent at best. And I've always thought Kasing is a pretty good player, even back looking back to old Dignitas UK days.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was going to say
I was waiting for the super hot crew. It's yeah, he's going old school. Okay, good.
Yeah, Dignitas UK, even at Gfinity, one, that player is good, even back in his Euro days. So, I'm glad he's getting another shot, and he's kind of he stepped it up. He had a little I wouldn't say spat, but he had a stint with Gamers 2, and he was probably one of the best players on the team, and now he's back in LCS, and he's doing well again. So
I think Kasing has proven himself to be a good choice for overall. But what does he do that makes the team successful? Is it ward control? Is it mechanical skill? Is it lane presence? What makes him good?
He looks like he's really good at pushing a go button. That's what I've noticed. He's been playing Annie, and I think he played a Thresh game. Yeah, I'd have to look at all his games. He's been on the team for a bit now, but it looks like he has a really good sense of, hey dudes, we should roll up and kill this dude, and he knows when to press the go button on that team, which, as mechanically skilled as a lot of their players are, it's pretty nice to have someone that has good decision making. So yeah.
He's one of those guys. I had the ability to talk with him in Cologne last year when I went to go visit during the summer, and he was one of those guys. When I asked him, what is it he wanted to be? What did he want to, have be his mark on the LCS? He said, I want to be a student of the game. The guy that he'd always looked up to is Yellowstar. His original name was, alluding to Yellowstar. And he saw that as the kind of guy that he wanted to be. He wanted to constantly be learning and adapting and finding ways to make the rest of the people on his team better. And when I look at what the big difference with this team is that, he's everywhere trying to get every single one of these guys what they need. When Odoamne needs to be able to carry, then he's drawing attention to other ends of the map so that Odoamne can get the farm that he needs to get to that point. When Ryu needs some help in the mid lane to turn things around, he's there. He does a really good job of getting other people where they need to be and kind of get them in that groove. And from there, you can kind of carry the rest of the game with their good mechanics and their team fighting, which is always, even when they weren't doing very well, that team fighting was never their biggest flaw. So I think.
Or go ahead. Sorry.
No, feel free.
He reminds me a lot of Lemon Nation in the sense that he's very good at roaming and moving around the map where he needs to be and helping other people out and warding up. And yeah, he just and Lemon's a pretty good shot caller too in the early game. So Kasing sees a lot of EU parallels to that for me. He's a very mechanically good player that also has a really good mind for where he needs to be, decision-wise. So, yeah, I think he's a good addition. I think he's probably the best thing H2K's done in the past few months in terms of roster moves. So, yeah.
I agree. Well, okay, so we were going to talk a little bit more about Roccat and Rockat's failings recently, and a little bit more about SK, but we'll cut Roccat because no one cares about Roccat. And SK, we're going to say...
I care about Roccat.
No, you don't.
I wish I didn't care about Roccat. Does that count?
Yeah, well, we'll bring you on later to talk about Roccat when they're...
Please don't.
Okay.
It hurts my heart.
We need a pair of pants and a telephone wire to talk about Roccat. So
well, we've gotten a little bit sidetracked on this episode in a good way, I would say, for the most part. So we're gonna skip right ahead to China. Let's put Kelsey right into her element. And I want to start, and let's just start so we can put the Twitter picture together, or not the Twitter picture, the Skype picture that she has currently on the overlay for everyone. Let's talk about Snake.
Yay!
Yay! Your favorite team ever.
Yay!
So, Snake versus M3 was an interesting series of games that. And M3 had an interesting adaptation, which was exploiting Snake's blatantly obvious weaknesses.
Yeah.
Why don't you run us through the games real quick, and M3 beating Snake. No one saw it coming, right? M3.
Believe it or not, this pick ban phase was actually been similarly executed by VG Gaming. They did it once and they won the game, and no one has done it again for some reason, where they banned both Nunu and Jarvan. And then the entire, Snake's entire draft phase in that game just kind of collapsed. They picked Olaf jungle and alongside Kog'Maw, which just didn't work out for them, that VG Gaming set. And then similarly, they picked Jinx, which Crystal doesn't really play much Jinx. So people pointed to that and they said, oh, well, he just kind of played whatever. They weren't taking M3 seriously, but then he comes around and he plays Draven. The thing is which is his champion. He's been a Draven main forever.
Which just says everything you need to know about Crystal, really, in a nutshell.
Everything. His positional... The reason why Nunu and Jarvan work so well with that team is because the strengths of Snake are in their front line. And I always kind of explain the way the team operates is that Beast will be on the top side of the map, and Flandre will take advantage of that to be able to go aggressive and to get a lot of farm and to just overwhelm the top laner. So then they have this really strong front line, and this zone controlled by Ela, who plays primarily Janna, and he always gets that pick because there are much easier ban targets. For example, Beast.
I mean, Beast and then
Baka.
and Baka's Xerath pick as well. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Who both have very limited champion pools, so he can get Janna pretty much whenever he wants. And then, so that front line is able to zone extremely well for Crystal, so that he can just position however he wants, essentially. But with a pick like Rek'Sai, he can have one knockup pretty much, which isn't as powerful in terms of the terrain setup, the period of time in which the absolute zero is channeled, things like that. So he can't make the same mistakes. And then they, of course, M3 picks Zed because they have Dade. And Zed, you can't really prevent Zed from getting on your AD carry if you want to. So that was also an extremely good adaptation. So it's just kind of an easy way to unravel Snake. And I think what a lot of Chinese teams do is, instead of building up their best player, they tend to focus a lot of resources on shoring up their weaknesses. In their strategies and team composition selections. So that's why you see a lot of focus on Crystal. That's why you see, for example, in VG Gaming, Dandy focusing on mid lane a lot. You see in WE, Spirit focusing on top lane.
Which always works out well, by the way. Love me some
Always.
Aluka. Feed Aluka some kills and watch what happens, ladies and gentlemen. It is beautiful. The man is a master of every top lane champion. He's bad. He's awful. He's legitimately terrible. I don't know why he's still on that lineup.
I will say Snake's frontline and zone control is really beautiful.
Well, and I think
it's just unfortunate that it's limited by champions. It's limited by the fact that it's limited by the fact that it's a necessity instead of something that they can just do really well and then also execute other strategies.
Well, and the other thing is that as great as Janna is and as great as Ela is at Janna, it limits a lot of their compositions when they're forced into that support pick, because basically Ela has to pick that. Let's be honest. If Ela doesn't get Janna, Crystal's dead constantly. More so than usual, at least from what I've seen, right? There's just I cannot imagine any situation where Crystal's suddenly lackluster positioning can be saved with any champion other than Janna. So that alone seems.
There was like one of my favorite moments was like Crystal walked forward in one of the Draven games into Candy and Love CD, which I think Love CD is like a really good support player right now, but Candy is like kind of a whatever AD carry. I would actually rate Crystal above Candy, except like Candy actually played really well that series. And he just like walks into them and they just like kind of crush him really hard. And Ella uses every peel that Janna has on her kit. It's like there's only so much I can do for you right now. But yeah, that moment illustrated kind of what happened in those two games very well.
I'm waiting for Bard to come out and to just like lock Crystal out of a team fight so we can't feed in like the mid game, right? Like just like all how many ults are going to be burned just keeping Crystal alive while the rest of the team gets there so they can actually team fight, right? Just Bard out Crystal every time until the rest of the team shows up because he's gonna get caught. We know he's gonna get caught. And then Ella can actually do something on the rest of the map. This is my dream, is that they'll just like leave Crystal to die and eventually use it for the I don't know. So I'm a Snake. I do like Snake, despite their big weaknesses in the form of Crystal and the way that they focus on it. Kelsey, would you say that replacing Crystal is the answer for Snake to be like, if you can find a similarly comparable player who doesn't need quite so much attention, do you think Snake could solely rely on like their impressive top laner, jungler, and support? Like, do you think those three alone could carry a game with just a safer AD carry?
That's the question, right? Because that's what Snake used to do in LSPL all the time, is they would just like ignore Crystal, like kind of make him peel for himself. So that's why he would always play these hyper carries, because eventually, no matter how much you feed, as long as, and like Snake used to be really good at executing these like split pushing strategies where they would just constantly be able to use Flandre to put pressure on the map somewhere else, and like a lot of the LSPL teams and other Chinese teams couldn't really like deal with or understand that kind of strategy, so they would just always be distracted, so they could stall out games really well that way, and with the side wave control and constantly pushing the minions. So eventually the games would get to this point where Crystal could just like two-shot you anyway, like playing Kog'Maw, even if you could get on top of him. So that's kind of like the strategy they would go with. And I don't know, like having those strategies where you focus on Flandre could be beneficial, but I almost feel like he's kind of young. He's kind of like a little too hero, like we talk about Wayless, when you put him on these carry champions, and that's why he's been playing like much more team-oriented picks. That closing out games could be like trickier for Snake, but it would be interesting. I would like to see them play more of these like cast and top type compositions.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll see it. It seems like they're pretty determined. And at this point, as far as I know, like very few teams have exploited Snake's weaknesses, which have been the same throughout the entire season, keep in mind. Obviously, Snake, people were surprised when Snake did as well as they did. They were a pretty bad team in LSPL. And they came in, they hit the ground running, and now teams are exploiting these weaknesses.
Well, they were still a second place. They're still a second place LSPL team. Like they automatically qualified for LPL. They didn't have to make the promotion, so they were decent in LPL, but they didn't. They honestly, the issue was they looked like they had hurt their roster by making the roster change, because they played a couple of these off-season tournaments and they looked worse. So eventually the roster swap paid off. They changed their coach. And they managed to get like the strategy together in time for LPL.
Yeah. Well, I hope that they figure it out, but it seems like if with such a simple pick ban strategy that is so efficient against them, it's hard for me to imagine them keeping their standing. You know what I mean? Like, if teams respect Snake and take the game seriously, like, it's hard for me to see Snake doing well in the future.
Especially with, like, how shocked I am to see so many of these lower bracket teams, like, suddenly proving they can be somewhat competitive, at least in, like, extreme instances. Like, it's going to be a lot harder for Snake going forward.
So, Speaking of slightly less competitive teams, I mean, there's so many to talk about this week. That's the thing. Oh, geez. Let's talk about M3. Very briefly, is Dade stepping up? We've talked about this every time we talk about LPL. We talk about this because people love Dade. I love Dade. Everybody loves Dade. Has he come out of retirement, Kelsey? Can you tell me? Is he back?
I don't think he's back. He doesn't look like the Dade that was, but I mean, he looks like he's making some of the less stupid decisions, like counterpicking himself, like using living shadow to get into like 5 people. But I think the difference here is that I feel like on Samsung Blue, he set up his team to succeed, like making a lot of these plays, like using the Yasuo abilities and like some of these roams down like the 1v3s and things like that. But here I feel like the team is setting up Dade, and that's the key here. Like the fear I have with M3 is that looking at their earlier games, we saw that Looper can perform on Gnar, Looper can perform on Lissandra, but he's had like really terrible games on almost every other champion. So like that's a concern when we talk about champion pools. I think the team is actually playing more around Love CD, the support player. Mm-hmm. And outside of LPL, which they 2-0'd Snake, and they almost got 2-0'd by Starhorn Royal Club, except Starhorn Royal Club had the most epic throw I think I've seen all year.
Oh man, they have a lot of bad games. We're gonna get to Starhorn. Believe me, I'm excited to talk about Starhorn.
They ended up going 1-1 with Starhorn because of that throw, but they probably should have lost both of those games. But outside of that, they went 3-2 to King in Demacia Cup. So they actually made it to the round of 8 in Demacia Cup. That was like a really exciting series, and again, like King's pick and ban phase. Oh my god, I want to kill them sometimes. So
okay, I didn't get to see
if King
games.
hadn't picked.
Are they still doing the thing where they have to pick Jarvan and Lisa in every pick ban phase?
Yes. Okay, so it was like really close 4 games, like really good 4 games, and like the 4th game, King just like slammed them. They were tower diving. They got their solo lane champions, and then the 5th game, like the Aurelia and the Ahri, which like, how did Axine like fall asleep hard enough? Axine is M3's coach, for them to get both like Aurelia and Ahri. And then the 4th game, they pick Jarvan top and Vayne Fiddlesticks bottom lane. Like, that is the worst draft I've seen all year. That's worse than like an OMG goofing off draft. Like, what is that?
You mean the unstoppable Vayne Fiddlesticks duo lane, where Fiddlesticks with his unstoppable early game mitigates Vayne's early game weaknesses?
Yeah, anyway. But so M3 went 5-3. They have to face EDG in round of 8, so I will be surprised.
No, don't even say you know what's gonna happen.
But yeah, I was surprised they made it to round of 8, so there you go. Job, M3.
All right.
I like them better than I did before. I don't think they're going to be like a huge team that suddenly like places top 4 or anything, but they're doing okay.
Okay. Well, they went 1-1 with Starhorn Royal Club, and you said that was obviously a giant throw. But in general, Starhorn were doing really well for a team without Name that wanted Name. And now they're doing really kind of bad. I mean, they lost to EP and Snake, and admittedly their Snake strategy was a little lackluster, and they didn't incorporate the wonderful pick ban strategy that is Nunu J4. They lost to IG2, and to be fair, I think IG has been performing better recently, but Starhorn Royal Club is like super hard on the decline, and I mean, what is causing this? And despite the fact that it's easy to just, in my opinion, say, oh well, we're just waiting for Name. Things will get better when Name gets there. I mean, what's going on with Starhorn?
Their decision making is like honestly awful. The thing is though they've been really passive in their games, and this is again like when I mean passive, I don't mean passive play. I mean indecisive. They're just like playing out lanes. They're not making decisions. And I think what allowed them to get ahead in M3 is they kind of had like this little bit of vigor where they were making decisions. They got their snowball on. Like they had 3 people in the bottom lane like they like to do. But I think the biggest thing with Starhorn is right now, like all of the gold is on the early towers. And this has been true for a while. But their AD carries, their AD carries don't really auto-attack structures. That's like a rude thing to say, but their AD carries that they have for subs right now are not good. And I think Starhorn Royal Clubs, like Name's not going to fix a lot of the decision-making issues, but he will at least allow them to get gold leads by just being an AD carry that can auto-attack towers and help them take towers. And so that will give them some of the cushion to make like some of these extraordinarily bad decisions. Though I will say one thing that I cannot get enough of Insect playing Hecarim because it's like the most hilarious thing in my life.
Pretty funny.
Yeah. The only thing better is Zatai playing Hecarim top. Right.
Oh man, another great example of Hecarim in the modern league. I actually the Energy Pacemaker was the only one that I saw from this week at least that was able to pull. They actually pulled it up against Starhorn Royal Club, which I have to point out, Kelsey, because you didn't. Wei's item build in that game. You pointed this out in your article, and I found it just fascinating. It's Trinity Force, Last Whisper, Bilgewater Cutlass, Sorcerer's Shoes, and Adorn's Blade. I'm not a great League of Legends player. I'm really not, but I'm almost positive that that's not how that's supposed to go. Usually Last Whisper as a second item probably isn't a great sign. And he did it twice, so it's not like we can call it like an outlier. It's just, it's very...
afraid to get killed, and that's like where the Bilgewater came from, but at the same time, like, Bilgewater on Corki isn't even ideal, and I don't know, it's just weird. Like, the entire build is kind of, it just feels like 3 pieces of different builds, like, thrown together.
I think it's based around just trying to get base damages off for poke in the mid game, and then Insect's itemization on Rengar is supposed to provide more damage as they move forward. It's mostly about protecting yourself and poking,
right,
as opposed to anything else. And I agree that it's lackluster.
Again, not taking towers is, I think, the biggest thing. Like, right now, if you have bad shot calling and bad decision making and bad strategy, you have to win by getting a lot of gold early on and taking towers, and
not letting Raphael have Victor either.
That's why OMG is in second place. Yay. Look at that. See how that works. Amazing. Okay.
Yes. It sounds less than thrilled there.
They had a really good game against EG.
No, but
yeah. I was gonna say I don't watch too much China as a general rule, which is why I'm letting you carry this. But that series I thought was really interesting. Just, game 1, you have Pawn going crazy on Nidalee, but it seemed like the rest of EDG just didn't have a way to make the team fights work for him. Nidalee's great for solo target damage, but Morgana, Zhi Yang's Morgana was really impressive to me, and it was outperforming as far as reliability Mako's Vigar in that one. And it was really interesting to see that one, and then immediately see the next game where you have, now you put back in Uzi and Cloud, and you go for the Hecarim top lane, and Going just gets smashed, and you get this Kassadin to 5 or 6 kills in the early game, and it just seemed like they never recovered. Like, is that something that you've noticed, or is this a new development? Because I've only watched a little bit over the last few weeks, so I'm not entirely sure how representative that series was for either team.
So, and a couple of things on EDG is that I feel like the integration of Pawn has been a little bit of a point of contention for them, just because Pawn isn't really a team fighting mid laner like you was. So they have focused a lot more on early game skirmishes, and that usually works okay for them. But And I think it's actually really strong against OMG because OMG's vision actually was much better this week than it has been, but their early game vision and their early game grouping, like, if we want to talk about the weird early game grouping we see in EU, like, that's what OMG does. They do, like, weird, strange, poorly executed early game grouping sometimes. That's just, like, there in the jungle doing God knows what. And so EDG was actually able to get a lot of early kills off of that. Especially because Cool picked Twisted Fate into Vigar and Nidalee, he's kind of decided he's Dade and he can just pick his best champions into whatever he wants. And it worked out for him, so whatever. But they kept getting caught, and so at the end, EDG in the second game, EDG adjusted their pick ban so that they could pick champions that could snowball off of those early kills. And that was really smart.
So, yeah, cool confuses me because there's a Mercurial Scimitar on this TF. I guess it's to deal with the Vigar, but
yeah,
that's odd.
I'm sorry that you do not accept like the Lord and Savior of the Chinese mid lane.
Right,
so
I will say that I don't know if this is okay. My other thing, and this is I should have educated myself about this before the show, but is Esportspedia bugged or is everyone in China building Devourer right now?
I would say that's incorrect.
Okay, it's supposed to be Warrior.
Everyone just builds Warrior or Magus if they're playing Nidalee, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, just making sure because I was like, lovely.
Or Juggernaut if you're Beast and you play Nunu.
If you're Nunu.
I had to make sure because I definitely saw Loveling building Devourer on Rek'Sai and I was like, oh my god. Well,
no,
damn it.
Please.
OMG, please.
But the Mercurial Scimitar actually happened, so.
Well, and I understand it against the Vigar support. Admittedly, looking down at the Vigar support, it does put it in better perspective. But
let's talk about Cool's TF and Vigar because there's a history there. He picked it like Young Glory counterpicked his Twisted Fate with Vigar last year, and he went 1-9 that game. It was really bad. But the thing is that Jiangun's Event Horizons I think were a lot more consistent and on point than Mako's. Like, Mako's Event Horizons weren't that good, so I was glad that he didn't pick up the pick again, but I mean, if you want to talk about Lay's Event Horizons, damn, it's good.
Oh, Kelsey. Just got into throwbacks.
Good Vigar.
No, and the sad part for me is that I love Mako, and it's just like I was really hoping for exciting Vigar.
Then you should watch King versus Vici Gaming. Lay's Vigar is really good.
Well, I don't love Vigar. I love Mako. Well,
I thought you said you love Vigar.
No, I love Mako, and I was really hoping his Vigar would be good. I might have said I love Vigar. Who knows? I do love me some Vigar, but I will. We'll watch more China, Kelsey, as your goal to get the whole world to watch China continues.
I don't know if that's my goal. I have no idea what my goal is.
Yeah, I like to. If I pretend that's your goal, it helps me put things in perspective as to why you love China so much. It's my logic.
Kelsey versus the world.
It's a good narrative, to be fair. Okay, well, so we've been running for about an hour and a half now, and I was gonna close it here, but Kelsey, if you are so inclined, would you like to talk about Vici Gaming?
Oh, I guess I can talk about Vici Gaming. They looked a lot better this week. A lot of bottom half teams looked a lot better. They had much more execution, and I think again, like, they figured out kind of that they have to work around Hatong, just because if like Hatong doesn't get jungle pressure, he just kind of bleeds gold, which is a sad thing to say. So he gets a lot more attention, and even though I feel like camping carry is like an auto win, but that's only if Hatong doesn't bleed gold. So they have to focus a lot more attention on like Hatong on the bottom side of the map. So carry can either just like have a really good game and win for them after that, or in the case with the World Elite games, if Aluka gets camped, it's a lot harder for him to just like win, and then Ninja kind of went off anyway, so
And it's
Yeah, but BG Gaming overall did pretty well. They went 4-2.
and
They could have secured like 4th place, I think, or 4th place, but they didn't.
And Hatong is quickly though appearing. Well, he's never been amazing, admittedly. I don't think he's even good now, but his Xerath is reliable. And I'm wondering if, as they move forward, if that's going to be a crutch, and if we're going to see a similar situation where it's Baka. I think, admittedly, Baka's actually a great Xerath, whereas Hatong can just not feed with Xerath. But he had some pretty stellar scorelines this week and some pretty solid games overall. And admittedly, a lot of that is from jungle pressure and a lot more like mid to late game kills as opposed to early game action. But Hatong performed better this week than I have seen him in the past. So I'm inclined to think that maybe Vici has just figured out their team identity a little bit better and they know their weaknesses a little bit more.
And I think we saw a lot of that generally. So, like, they played a lot faster games, which I think comes with like having more confidence in team play. So
maybe we can live the dream. Maybe this will finally be the dream roster. We got the Mata Dandy dream, right? That everybody wants.
Cross the fingers. No? No.
That's not what this team is. Like, there's no way you can do this with the carries that you have. Like, the mid lane and the AD carry. There's no way this is a dream team.
What part of that made you think I wanted the truth, Kelsey? I said the dream, and then you told me.
To be fair, they had the shortest game all year. Like, Energy Pacemaker couldn't even surrender.
Yeah, I think it was 1950.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was right before the surrender mark, which is always fun. You rarely see a team stomp that hard, but then again, it is Energy Pacemaker, so.
But Energy Pacemaker 2-0'd Starhorn Royal Club, who almost 2-0'd Master 3, who 2-0'd Snake. So what is going on, China?
Yeah.
Please explain this to me.
China thinks I want consistency. I need top teams to beat bottom teams. I need it to make sense. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Before we go, I want to make sure that we promote everybody who's on the stream's content in general. So first up, Kelsey, I know you just released a video on Welis and his why you think or why you believe, and I think after watching the video, I completely agree with you on why he's an amazing mid laner. So where can they find that?
On the CLBC YouTube channel, the Chinese Law Broadcasting YouTube channel. The easiest way to find that is probably just to go to the @ChineseLawBC Twitter, and it's linked there. So
@ChineseLawBC on Twitter. I'll make sure to share their Twitter handle as well as the YouTube video itself. I thought it was phenomenal. It's kind of one of the first long form videos we've seen from Kelsey, and I thought it played out really well, and I liked it overall. So go watch that if you're interested in China and Chinese law in general and you want to know more about it. And then, of course, Jacob, do you have anything coming out in the near future?
Yeah, I'm working on a new piece for Goldperton, so shout out to those guys. Terms of Gfinity and Esports Heaven. I just had a piece that came out on Obvious, the jungler from former in-faculty jungler is moving to NA to play for Roar. Mainly this month's going to be kind of slow because I'm working on a pretty big esports project that's unspoken. So,
okay.
But expect to see that within April-ish. So,
if you want more info about Jacob or his mysterious esports projects that shall not be named at this point, make sure to follow him on Twitter. Shout outs to Goldperton, Gfinity, and Esports Heaven, who he has written for all of those. And then, of course, Chase, last but not least, give us your shout outs.
Yeah, at Redshirt King on Twitter. I usually try to live tweet during the European and North American games. So if you like seeing people respond live and arguing with their with the silly things that they say, follow me on Twitter. I have a podcast. If you go to podomatic.com/lessthanlegends, you're going to see two different types of things. We have the Guest Alliance podcast, where I kind of treat the LCS like Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal do it for the NFL, where you try to see who can get closer to the actual line and kind of see what the casinos are thinking about where the league is right now, which is a lot of fun. And I'm also working on a trade value article that should hopefully, the first part of it, I'm hoping to get out on Paravine by the end of the week. I'm still working on it now. And if you want to hear where that's starting, I'm going to put out a 2-hour podcast right after we finish this talk show, where it's going to be basically 2 hours of me arguing with my good friend Walter Fedchuk from the North American Challenger League as we go over what we think are the 50 most valuable players in the West. So if you like stupid lists that are sure to have a lot of flaws in them, by all means, give it a listen. I'd love to get feedback.
All right.
Nice.
Well, thanks again to all of our panelists, Kelsey, Jacob, and Chase. Thanks to all of you who watched tonight. Thanks to Paravine Network. Follow us at Paravine Network on Twitter. You can check out paravine.com for all the latest League of Legends and other esports news info. Got some Halo articles up there as well. And we'll see you guys next week. This has been episode 21 of Into the Rift.